We all die. The question is, how many of us will run from it? Okay, folks. Face the Raven. What some people consider to be the first part of a three-parter. And if you consider it that means this is Act 1 of a story that falls completely apart in the third act. At least to my memory. I am still going forward trying to be open-minded. And I am really sorry that I feel like I keep dwelling on where things are going with Hellbent. But a lot of stuff is attempting to build towards it. And some of it even competently. That I can't help but have my mind on it. Anyways, so this story starts with the Doctor and Clara getting contacted by Rigsy because he has a tattoo on the back of his neck that is counting down. And he is understandably concerned about this. So the Doctor and Clara try and help. They end up finding what they call a trap street. It's hidden by basically a souped-up perception filter. And there are a bunch of just sporadic refugee aliens, for lack of a better term. This is kind of interesting coming off the back of the Zygons, knowing that they were integrated, whereas these folks, seem to go out of their way to self-isolate. And this whole thing is overseen by Lady Me. Now, Mayor Me, apparently, or Ishildur, or, just Maisie Williams. She's back again. So she's overseeing this whole thing, and there seems to be a very tenuous law and order and amount of control that she has over what goes on here. And ultimately, a lot of that comes down to her employment of the Raven. And what this is, I forget what the Doctor calls it exactly, but it locks onto people with what's called a chronolock. And when the timer counts down, it comes for you. It doesn't matter where you run across time and space, it will find you and it will kill you once it has been set upon you. And basically, this means that the way Ishildur maintains order here is not necessarily through an iron fist, but through a very, very harsh penal system. So they believe that Rigsy killed someone, and he has now had this timer set on him and is counting down. Now, that might seem flimsy, like he appeared to be. There's no evidence. There's no witnesses. There was no trial. Yes, that is correct. There were none of those things. So what we're dealing with here, and this is admitted openly by Ishildur, which is good that she said this because otherwise it would have seemed really flimsy, which is her saying, like, they were angry. I had to do something to quell the unrest. Basically, she had to offer up a scapegoat, and it really does give us an idea of how uncertain and how by a thread the peace in the street is hanging on to. I wish that was a little bit more in evidence in the interactions, because everybody seems pretty united here. Now, granted, they're united in an apparent hatred of Rigsy, who they otherwise know nothing about, but we don't get a tangible feel of the tension between the residents that we're told exists. So this is a case of telling without showing properly as far as that particular element of the story goes. But let's start talking about the big thing that happens here. Clara does something that she thinks is quite clever, because at the beginning of this thing, well, not the beginning, but once they're all in this street, Ishildur gives her reassurance to the Doctor that no harm will come to Clara. So once Clara finds out that the chronolock can be passed on if the person who has it is willing to pass it and the person who's going to receive it is willing to receive it, it can be moved from one person to another. And so she has Rigsy pass it on to her because she thinks, well, she gave her word that harm won't come to me. So even if we fail at, us trying to prove your innocence, no one will get hurt because she won't let that happen. And it almost seems like a good idea, but obviously Clara is missing a few key details. And what we find out is the Raven once the lock has been set, needs to be satisfied. And the only one who can break that contract is the person who initially set it onto the person. So Ishildur can, and at the end she is prepared to, remove the lock from Rigsy. The problem is, once Rigsy passes it on to Clara, Ishildur is no longer part of the deal. It's been renegotiated without her, and she's been cut out. So now the only person who can remove the lock basically no longer has access to it, because it was part of a side deal that she wasn't privy to. And so now Clara's going to die. And they all know it. And they can't stop it. And she tries to face that with bravery and trying to be sure that the doctor isn't going to go off the rails once she's gone. And there's some other stuff going on. Things are honestly a little more complicated than they need to be in terms of this plot. And it turns out the woman who was dead isn't really dead. And it was all a scheme to get the doctor in, just to get the doctor to turn a lock so that they could stick a teleporter bracelet on him. It's a little overconvoluted. Now, it kind of gets away with it because the emotional heart of it, especially once they realize Clara is going to die, plays so strongly that it glosses over and, kind of muscles you past the fact that this scheme was kind of absurd and ridiculous. Because if you actually stop and think about it, it really was. This was the most straightforward way you could think to latch this thing onto the doctor? Really? Because this is convoluted as hell. I mean, what if Rigsy hadn't had the doctor's number? Or what if he did, but he hadn't thought to call them? There's it's one of those elaborate plans where there's so many things that you were dependent on that you could not have been certain would have happened the way that you wanted them to. This is a bad plan. Yeah, it works, but dang. So there's that element. But like I said, it doesn't dwell on it, which means it doesn't allow the viewer to dwell on it and to realize it is a whole lot of nonsense. So that helps in terms of getting the whole thing to move past what would otherwise be a weak point, because that's not the point. We have arrived at the point. The point is she's going to die. And I've talked up to this point about the things that this series has done in terms of laying groundwork for Clara trying to be like the doctor, of her having more fun than is probably safe for her to be having given the situations she is in. This actually isn't even a completely new idea. Series 2 did this a bit with Rose and the Doctor. Now Rose wasn't trying to be like the Doctor, but their very flippant and carefree attitude about stuff going on was brought up by a number of characters and in some ways reflects helped enhance the tragedy of when Rose got locked into the other dimension, because they were just so certain that everything was going to work out okay. Now, what's interesting about this one, especially contrasting it with that, is not only is Clara trying to be herself much more like the Doctor, certainly than Rose ever was, but also the Doctor isn't being flippant, but Clara is. And in my head, that's because the Doctor remembers how badly things went the last time things got too comfortable and it felt too easy. And so he's a little bit more nervous. And he's said in previous episodes, don't try to be like me. But Clara doesn't know what has happened in the past. And she keeps trying. And this move that she pulls, it's a very Doctor move, or at least the Doctor, she understands him. But because she doesn't have his knowledge base, this decision kills her. And it's even set up within this episode because, you have early on, the very first scene, they rush into the TARDIS and they're talking about how they almost got killed, and she's laughing. They're trying to find the trap street. She is looking out the door of the TARDIS with the sonic sunglasses, and while they're flying over the city, and the TARDIS lurches, her entire top half falls out of the TARDIS. She is hanging there basically by her feet and laughing. She is so cocky and so certain that she's going to be okay that she has become reckless. And she pays the price for it. That that element of her, this series especially, and like I will still say to a certain degree that it feels like they had different purposes and character traits for Clara that kind of got bolted on each series that went along. But this series, they've decided that what they were going to focus on was her arrogance, her cockiness. And it has been appropriately planted and brought into question as a potential character flaw. And any good tragic end to a character should be brought about by themselves to a certain degree. Not knowingly, actually usually not knowingly, but it should in some way tie to a fatal character flaw. And that is hers. At least hers as she is presented in this series. But limiting my view to Series 9, this has been really well executed. In terms of building up to this, giving the hints to the audience that, maybe the way she's going about being with the Doctor isn't the best, and having that be the end of her. And there's actually quite a bit of power when she does, as the title says, face the Raven. She tries to be strong. But once it enters her, in real time, probably like a couple of seconds, but it's done in slow motion, so it's drawn out, that the Raven is inside her between when that happens and when she dies. She screams, and I think it was a very smart idea to not have that scream be audible to the audience. It is clearly audible as characters around her react and clearly hear it, but we don't. Because I think a scream would have killed that moment, and it plays much stronger having it be silent like this. But that it is clear she is making these noises, but we're just not going to hear it. That moment plays very powerfully. And like I said, her talking to the Doctor and saying what she does to him to try and keep him grounded, to try and keep him from going off the rails.
I know what you're capable of. You don't be a warrior. Promise me. Be a doctor.
She is pleading with him to not succumb to the anger that she is already seeing him feel. There's that wonderful moment from Capaldi when he yells at his shielder. His shielder is so certain, like you wouldn't, he starts saying, I'm going to bring hell down onto this street if you don't fix this. And she can't.
I know the doctor.
The doctor is no longer here. You are stuck with me.
So, Clara's already seeing how angry he is, just knowing he's about to lose her. She knows how badly that this could go, and she's pleading with him. Don't do that. Which, in some ways, is part of what really irritates me about Hellbent when we get there, or at least has historically. Again, we'll see what I think when I actually rewatch the thing. But for him to do what he does in that episode is to dishonor Clara. He is disregarding her last words to him, her pleas to him. And one could make an argument that, there's nothing wrong with a character, selfishly trying to bring someone back the way that I would say it does appear that he does and the Doctor does in Hellbent. But for a character that had such a wonderful sign-off and gave a very good argument for why the Doctor should not be vengeful, it just feels wrong that ultimately he will be. But that's something we'll deal with in a couple of episodes. The overall thing is fine. I like the idea of the street. The execution of it is a bit more okay. Having it be a shielder, that works. I'm not sure it really needed to be her, But I suppose to a certain degree, it did help that it was someone who the Doctor knew. I guess theoretically it could have been any character the Doctor had met before who was an alien who had every reason to be on Earth, or, just otherwise wasn't just a straight human. But she's one we'd seen across this series already, so I guess she was an easy enough go-to. There's nothing wrong with it being her. I'm just not sure what it being her specifically adds to the proceedings, but she's fine. I still think the best use of Maisie Williams was in The Woman Who Lived, but she's still solid here. It's the emotional beats in this, and it's the execution on Clara's death being brought about by her own hubris. That works excellently, and that's what needed to work. This is one of those episodes where it's not perfect, but it absolutely succeeds in the areas that it had to. Any given story, there are some elements that if you don't get this right, the whole thing falls apart. But if you nail that and there's weakness elsewhere, it'll still be okay. And that's kind of the case here. The plot to get the Doctor's kind of nonsensical. There's a bit too much show don't tell about the street itself as much as it's a cool concept, but the things that it absolutely had to get right, it does. So ultimately, this episode does succeed at what it sets out to do. And it's a strong setup for what is about to come immediately after, and then for what comes after that. Oh, we're getting close to this thing. I'm so nervous. I'm actually nervous even for the next one because I love Heaven Sent. I really, really do. And I have not rewatched it in a bit. But we'll see. Face the Raven. Have you rewatched it lately? What do you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. I have a Patreon, which helps keep the lights on and keeps my bills covered. And there are various rewards. You get access to videos early. You get to vote in polls. You get to see my docket for the month, so you get to see what I have coming up. Plus, there's a Discord and a bunch of other stuff. And even if you're not able to do that, liking, sharing, subscribing, all those things do help me out as well. But you also don't have to. End of the day, you're the council. I'm just running the meeting. And until next time, this council is adjourned.